This is Karen with NewClevelandRadio.net, and it is time for Avoid the Maze. Now, Avoid the Maze is about a journey, and the person who is taking us on her journey today is Lois Letchford. And Lois has listened to a couple of our podcasts in the past, but when she wrote me, it just made me say, wait a second, she's someone who has to be a guest on the show. And the reason being is that she has 3 sons. They're all different, and we all should be different. Okay. We all shouldn't be the same, right, Lois? If you had 3 boys that were exactly the same, your house would be boring. But one of the things that we definitely have in common is that all of our children are not perfect specimens. And occasionally we see they need a little help in a certain area. Sometimes we can get that help if we have all the right connections, but most times it's difficult to get the help because people look at us and make assumptions. So Lois, welcome to Avoid the Maze, and hopefully we can help a few people along the way, but give our listeners a little bit of your backstory.
Well, I'm delighted to be here, Karen, and share this with you, my backstory. I grew up undiagnosed dyslexic, but I survived school because I could read words, but my comprehension was compromised. Okay, but I get myself through school and college, and I marry well, because I married a man who's on the opposite end of the spectrum to me, and he's the top of the field. Now, he's an academic, and then we have these 3 children. 3 sons. The first one is fine, and he thinks and talks at the speed of light. The second one is the absolute opposite, and he learns so slowly and speaks slowly. He's very good at doing puzzles. And the youngest one has problems that you can't identify easily. So that's the start. My second son goes to school and he fails first grade. He was terrified of school. He bit his fingernails, he wet his pants. What I didn't know was the teacher shouted at him every day. The end of the year, what do you have to do? I actually had to ask for the testing. And the testing reveals he can read 10 words, he's got no strength, and he has a low IQ. That's a disastrous beginning for a child's life, because the chances of getting out of that are close on 0. Expectations that child will learn to read are 0. Anyway, my husband's a professor. He has study leave the next year in Oxford, England, and our family join him. I decide to take Nicholas out myself and teach him at home. I start with a series of books called Success for All. Disaster. Disaster. Only decoding. Disaster. And my mother-in-law's with me, and she said, Lois, put away what's not working and make learning fun.
Interesting.
What can he do? He can see patterns and he can rhyme words. And with that, I started to write poems. Simple, crazy poems. It was transformative. And then every day I had a new poem for him. I read to him, we laughed, we illustrated, we talked about everything. And then I came up with doing the double O's, like Cook, Look and Book. And I came up with Captain James Cook, and our learning went poof, because Nicholas started to really understand what learning was about. And then we're learning about Cook, and he said, who came before Captain Cook? And I said, that's easy, Nicholas, that's Christopher Columbus. And he said, and who came before Columbus? And I'm floored, because it showed me he didn't have a low IQ. All right, we returned to Australia, and I meet the lady who'd done the testing that 12 months earlier. And I said, he's asked these amazing questions and we've had such a fantastic time. And see, when we're in England, we're seeing things, hearing things, talking, everything. And she stood in front of me and she said, the reading teachers told me he's gone backwards. And in fact, he's the worst child I've seen in 20 years of teaching.
Wow.
It took me a long time, but I went back to her office and I said, you can call him whatever you like, but if he is the worst child you've seen in 20 years of teaching, don't expect him to learn like everyone else. And for me to even say or think those words, I had to have this time in England with Nicholas, understanding his strength, understanding how he thinks. That's the short story. 20-something years later, Nicholas receives his PhD in applied mathematics from Oxford University.
So something that I need to share with you, when my son Alex was 11, 12 years old, we were getting some support services through the County Board of Mental Retardation. They were giving us counseling, and they had a peer program. And my son didn't want to go to the peer program, and I could understand why, because 90% of the time he was typical. The 1% of the time that he wasn't, usually was because he was copying other people's behavior more than his own. We had a psychologist, or I think she was a psychiatrist, who called us into her office after she did a myriad of testing on him. And we're sitting in her office, glass windows all around us. And she looks at my son, who loves music and sports. You ask him anything about sports, he can tell you. So we're sitting there, and she says, I need to tell the three of you, your son will never graduate high school without an aide every single day sitting by his side. This was at the point he was going into middle school. He did not want an aide. He begged us not to have an aide. And so here she's saying he has to. And then she says, and once he finishes high school, he will be like that gentleman who's out in the hallway. And there was a young man pushing a broom. My husband, who is normally mild-mannered, jumped up, got red in the face, and said, you are a quack. You will not talk to my family this way. And she kept demanding he sit down and listen. He said, no, I'm out of here. He walked out. My son starts running after his dad. He saw what his dad was going through and how his dad was defending him. And she said, Alexander, you sit down. You forget that man. Forget your father. I'm the only one who is stunned, and I'm just sitting there. I'm not saying a word. And to make a very long story short, after we left there and she tried to contact the school, his doctors, and everybody else with this report, my son says to us, Mom, I want you to know, yes, I have problems, but like my neurologist says, I will mature through them. And that was the beginning of him starting to change. So the help that we thought we had was terrible help. And that's something you and I talked about offline, that there's so much information out there. And I don't care where you are financially. We all need to be looked at individually and to get the help we need. Now, you spent how many years teaching Nicholas how to read and become the wonderful young man he is today?
I only had really 4 months in Oxford, but just that transformation was important. However, the next year that he's in school, I'm a stay-at-home mum. He goes to school. When he comes home in the afternoon, I've got an activity ready for him that I have thought about all day to support him in school so that I'm teaching exactly what he needs. You know, without that support, you're getting standardized stuff, not targeted right to that individual. And that all takes time and effort, if not money.
Well, and for many families, the money is that you become a stay-at-home mom when maybe between your own education, your own personal needs to excel are taken away from you. And
Yeah.
even though it's great helping your child, I know the times that I spent at home, I wanted to be there for my child, but at the same time, I wanted to follow my dreams. And
Yes.
so I was torn.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. I was able to use Nicholas's experience to train, to, what do you call it? To turn, to repivot. And I became a reading specialist because of him. I did not trust the reading specialist in the school that we were in. The classroom teachers were phenomenal, but I did not trust the reading specialist because she was teaching Nicholas one-on-one.
Interesting.
You know, there's no reason not to individualize the instruction when you're teaching a child in the privileged position of one-on-one.
So where did you start to see this transformation in him when you started working with him? Was it something almost immediate that you connected to?
The poetry. The poetry took away the pain. It made him laugh. Oh, I've got to tell you this. Nicholas is 30. He's graduated with his PhD. And I asked him about his learning in grade 1. My son cried. And not a word emerged from his mouth. And that's when I recognized trauma for the first time ever. And I couldn't deal with that. So I said, Nicholas, tell me what happened when you and I learned together. There was a transformation. He's laughing. And he said to me, I'll never forget the poems you wrote. And he named them: A Mug of a Bug, The Windmill on the Hill. Never forget. And then he said, and well, the cook and the mapping taught me to love learning, and I never want to stop learning. And then he started to giggle. You know, it was this 7-year-old giggle bubbling up. And he said, and you wrote a poem about the witch's spell. And he said, I don't remember what it was, but I remember we wrote the ingredients for the witch's spell. I don't remember what they were, but it was so funny. Here he is 25 years later. That's the power that the learning I had with him. Stuck forever. And it taught me about the power of emotions with learning. And we're not just teaching children to decode. We've got to teach them to decode, show them that it's fun and exciting and worthwhile.
So you mentioned that you were diagnosed with dyslexia, and I know
Undiagnosed.
undiagnosed. Okay. And interestingly enough, I have a brother-in-law who was diagnosed right around middle school. And my in-laws at the time, they tried tutoring, they tried everything they could. And they didn't realize that his father, my father-in-law, also had the issue, because he was such a jolly guy. He always found a way around it.
Yes.
And so now his son is being diagnosed, and he sort of admits, you know, I really can't read.
Yeah.
And my mother-in-law looked at him and said, well, we can't let that happen to our son. Okay. You've been very lucky. Okay. She said, but he may not meet somebody like me who's going to support him. He may not have a secretary who says, oh, he's just too busy to do certain things. So they sent my brother-in-law away to school, which was good, but it was bad, because they sent him to this private school. Almost everybody there had lots of money. The kids, they didn't care if they were learning or not, because they knew, you know, mom and dad were going to take care of them. When I first met my brother-in-law, I said to him, what did you learn at this school? And he told me all the wrong things. It wasn't about his reading. It wasn't about, and I said, so how are, because he's in business. He's a partner in numerous restaurants. He does real well. But he said, one of the things I did learn amongst them is how to fake it till you make it. And I thought, how sad.
I agree.
You know, They spent so much money. Now, yeah, he's successful, but
Yes.
if he had been taught how to learn, he probably could even be more successful.
Yes.
So as you and I are talking here, you were able to be a stay-at-home mom and take care of your kids. I didn't have that luxury. So I was constantly juggling balls. And we know there are people who have it even much harder than you and I. Single moms, single dads who are raising children who they don't have the training. They don't have the time, they don't have the money, they don't. So what kind of hope can you give them if you can?
What type of hope do I give them? You have to fight for your child. First up, believe in your child. What my story tells me is your mindset matters. At the end of first grade, I would have been in agreement with the school. My child is not very smart. I needed to see him in another light. So you've got to believe that your child is capable of doing things. That's the first. And stick with it. Stick with them. Let them know they're capable. And I think you've got to portray that to the school. Yes, the testing might say this, but this is what I'm seeing. And the problem we come up with is you as a parent only have anecdotal records. They have the black and white from every man and his dog that says the opposite. And it's a matter of then getting the language to talk with the school to say, yes, that is your testing. However, this is what I'm seeing. How can we get these two to match? And how, irrespective of those odds, I still believe my child can learn to read. And you know, all of this, as you and I talk about all the people who aren't as privileged, all of this takes time, effort, energy. There's no simple solution to when your child does not fit normal.
Well, I think many of us really don't fit standardized normal.
Yeah.
It wasn't until I went back to complete my degree in college and go for my master's that I figured out how to learn. I struggled in high school. I struggled for my associate's degree because telling me to read a chapter on history that is so dry and it's like I'm second guessing what the next word is. And so now when I go to get tested on it, I don't remember anything. Okay.
Yes.
Yes. But when I went back for my master's and I was doing it online and I had to write and I had to research, I found different ways of doing it. Sometimes it was reading a chapter in a book. Sometimes it was, even though they would say, don't Google it, I still did because I needed that entertainment to say to me, hey, here's something exciting. Now go research it a little bit more. And I remember when I graduated, I told my mother, and my mother had said to me, we always knew you were smart. We just didn't understand why you struggled. Yeah. And I said, because math meant nothing to me until I could use it in a practical sense. And then I could say, oh, yeah, now I know how to get the square footage of my room. And now I know why I need to. But in school, it made no sense. No. So as I look at our educational system, at least here in the United States, I know it's difficult for teachers to make learning equal for 30 kids in a classroom. But I agree with you that we can't just look at standardized tests. We can't just look at their behavior in the classroom. We have to start to identify it and get the help outside of school. So when these kids go back into the classroom, they're a little bit excited about learning.
What you just said then, you know, about finding ways around it is what's critical. And that's what parents can do. You know, we now have YouTube. Everything's available on YouTube. Find a way around it. Tap into a child's interest and knowledge. And what you said, write about it. And even if they get a scribe or you use the computer to write, ask them to write it, reread it. And if they can't reread it, the computer sure can.
Right.
And the other thing that's important to me is listening to audiobooks so that the children are being exposed to the best literature. One of the challenges with literacy and early literacy is the children who struggle the most also receive the worst instruction. And that's what would have happened to Nicholas. They would have stuck with the letters and sounds, which he wouldn't have known, which was boring to him, which was irrelevant to him. And they never tapped into this brain that is phenomenal and his curiosity that's unbelievable. You know, so teaching has to adjust to meet the needs of the child. And yes, we do have to teach them to read and decode but how are we doing it?
Now, how did you take what you did for Nicholas to help your youngest son?
Oh, that was a struggle. I was not able to help my youngest son as much as Nicholas. He wouldn't cooperate with me. He just didn't learn in the same way. But you noticed I couldn't work with him. So I had to leave him fail in school until he was about 5th grade. And in 5th grade, after school, I was working. You're going to read a page of a book. I'm going to read a page. Then we're going to read a page together. And that made a huge difference. And that's where, but it's still, you know, he would then read a test and get everything wrong and tell me he got it all right. I mean, what do you do when your child does that to you? I'm trying to believe him and trust, yes, you've got it right. And he hasn't. That was a struggle.
And I'm sure it was a struggle for him because he did not want to disappoint. So it was easier. And I have to admit, my last year of my associate's degree, I was ill, but not too ill to go to class. Okay. But I used it. And when I started doing poorly, I remember my parents coming up to visit me at school and saying, tell us what the problem is. And I blamed it on everything. Okay. The time of my classes, the weather, my chair in the class didn't make any difference. And my father just looked at me and he said, you can blame it on everything else if you want. And if it's all their faults, I want you to go pack your bag right now. We're going to take you home because school is not for you.
Yeah.
And I looked at him and I said, no, you're not going to do that. He said, then what are you going to do differently? I said, I haven't figured it out yet, but I will. And I made it through that last semester of school. Actually, probably got the best grades I ever got because somebody was telling me I couldn't do it. And I needed to prove I will find a way to do it. Now, that's not for everybody, and we know that. Okay. But it sounds like that's part of the issue that your younger son has because he has 2 brothers who are doing what they need to do, and he doesn't want to disappoint mom.
It's taken a long time for him to work out. It's still not worked out. You know, but what we were talking about earlier, you know, we were talking about the movie, whatever we call it, miniseries, The Maid.
Right.
Which is, I think, really worth watching. And it struck me again how much falls to the mother.
Absolutely.
You know, she's on her own. How do you work? How do you get childcare with no support? I mean, that, and the juggling act that you do is unbelievable, particularly with young children who need constant supervision.
And many of us are doing that even in a marriage. Yeah.
I haven't got grandchildren yet of my own, but I want to be near them when they're around. I just want to be around the corner. I don't have to be in their face or in the house, but I'm here to help you because both parents are working now full time.
And it's difficult. You know, I know that for about 10 years there, my husband and I were both in IT. And one week I traveled, then I came home and worked from home. That was the week that he traveled. And we have different parenting styles. And we knew that, but we thought we were trying to mesh them. And when my son was graduating college, he sat us down and he said, "You both did me a disservice for 10 years." And I said, "What did we do?" And he said, "The fact that I had a very lenient parent 1 week when dad was here, and then I had a very strict parent when you were here." And I looked at him and I said, "Seriously?" And if I look back now, I know he's right.
Yes.
But for him being on the spectrum, he
Yes.
he couldn't flip the switch easily.
Yeah.
And so he struggled, but he struggled emotionally. And I think if we had identified that back then, we could have made his life a lot easier.
Yeah.
Although we still both would have had to travel because
Yes.
that's what we had to do. So for our listeners out there, we're not telling you that you have to be a stay-at-home mom or a
No.
stay-at-home dad, but you have to find a balance. But if you don't take care of yourself, Lois, you can't take care of your kids.
Well, I've just recently been doing, I don't know, more work on all sorts of things. And for parents to get some parenting skills and get support as your parent. And there are people that do that. I needed it because if you don't, what you do is repeat what your parents did for you unconsciously.
Right.
It's not working, but then you don't have the skills to say, what else do I do? So that would be number one, before you even deal with the children, get some skills to deal with these children that are normal or even not normal. So you come up with some solutions because there's a whole lot better way of doing things than what we did with our kids.
And we have to be kind to ourselves at some point and realize that with the skills doesn't mean we're going to be perfect. There are days that, like I just said, my son will tell me something. I'll go, "Oh, why did I do that?
Why
Oh
did I do
my."
that?
But
Yeah.
I've stopped feeling guilty because I did the best I could. For many years, I blamed my mother and thought that we had a love-hate relationship. We knew we loved each other, but we were going head to head all the time. And in the last 2 months of her life, I spent with her, lived with her, and I realized we did not have a love-hate relationship. We had a beautiful, loving relationship. But one little incident somewhere along the line had me convinced that we were knocking heads. But everybody that I talked to said, no, for the most part, you're huggy, you're kissy, you're supportive. And it was like, so I spent a majority of my life thinking something, but at least I got my answers. And I didn't want to repeat that with my two boys.
Yeah.
And so I've been very, very careful. And my oldest son one day said to me, "Mom, stop walking on eggshells. I'm your son. You're my mom. You're not perfect. I'm not perfect."
Yeah.
So, we all want to do the best. We all want to see our kids grow and be out on their own. But like you said, your youngest most likely is going to be with you.
Yes.
As he is now.
Yeah.
So how do you plan for his future?
At the moment, we don't even talk about it.
Okay.
Because it's too hard, because he thinks he's going to do a gaming company and it's going to fly and all of this and it's going to be brilliant. And so when you're living in that world, you can't have a discussion on what the options are. And so we just follow through. We just let it go and know that we will have to support him in some way, shape or form.
So when is there time for mom and dad?
He sleeps odd hours, so we have our own time and our own doing things together, and we ride bikes and we walk together and ski together, so we're away from the house. But I think it impacts my husband more, particularly with COVID, because he's been working from home.
Got it. Yep, absolutely.
It's an emotional drain and it's a challenge. And who he upsets and who he doesn't upset impacts everyone.
Right. And this is why family, friends, and acquaintances are so important. And they need to understand. They need to sometimes, tap us on the shoulder and say, let's go for a walk.
Yeah.
Let's go have a cup of tea.
Yeah. Yeah.
Probably for the first 15 years of my son's life, we lost all of our friends because they were all so afraid that if they got close to us, this might rub off. And it doesn't rub off. Let's be honest. Okay. And I kept saying, like, why can't we get together? Well, what if your son has a meltdown? What if you've had a bad day with him? Okay. Everybody can have a bad day. So I don't have to be distanced from you. But within the last 5 years, now that my son is more typical than anything else, now people are knocking on the door. Oh, we haven't seen you in 15, 20 years. Let's get together. And it's like, you know what? I'm going to seek out new friends because you left me behind.
I agree. It's very hard with friendships. It's very difficult. That's all I can say. And I was just so thankful we had family. We had both my parents and my husband's parents relatively close by. Without them, we would have been lost. We would have been alone. And you need family, you need friends, because all of my children are different. And they don't fit normal, and I didn't deal with them well. And if anything, I need someone to say, let's do this course together. Let's do something. Let's work out. Let's try something else. It's okay that you're not doing it right now. Let's try something else. That's what I wished I had done. I mean, today I'm just thankful my sons talk to me.
Yeah, I understand that one.
I'm just so thrilled they talk to me.
And when you referred to the miniseries, The Maid, the interesting part is that she had some family, very disjointed. She had some friends, and again, very disjointed. But she needed real support. And the person who ends up really supporting her is not the person that we ever would have expected. And so I really want people to go watch the movie.
The series. Yeah.
Are you going to cry?
Yes.
Yeah, you're going to
Yes.
cry. Are you going to think that it's fictional? There's parts of it that are, but you know what? I think if you stop somebody on the street, you'd find out, how close they are to reality. So it's a phenomenal miniseries. And I plan on watching it again because the first time I watched it, I know I was multitasking. So I just want to really sit down and just really watch it. So you have 3 boys. How do the 3 boys get along?
Oh, quite well. The 2 eldest get along well, but see, they're not living close by. We've got Nicholas in England. We've got the eldest Nathaniel now in California. But the time difference makes it challenging, and you actually just can't pick someone up and call them. You actually have to check out.
Right.
I make an appointment. When do I talk to you today? When suits you? Because the time difference and the work style and so they live on different continents and whatever. Yeah, but the eldest 2 get along well. And Nicholas is the peacemaker in the family. And Isaac struggles with both, really, because he hasn't achieved the way they have. And you see yourself as a problem. It's very interesting. So, and the boys are very good to him.
And that's extremely important. And I'm sure you tried to normalize it the best you could under all the circumstances that you were through. And you mentioned your husband, because being in academia, people assume, which they shouldn't, but they assume that your whole family is brilliant. They're going to follow in your footsteps. And that's one of the things that I've had to convince my husband not to make those assumptions. So my husband has always been handy with tools. He's an IT person. He loves to study. And so for 31 years, he's wanted his son to follow in his footsteps. And we finally got ourselves into counseling because I had to say to him, look at, you're killing our son by telling him what he should do. What did your father want you to do? And he goes, he wanted me to be in sales. And I said, you went into sales and you hated it, didn't you? And he goes, yes. I said, and you waited till your father passed away to follow your dreams because you didn't want to disappoint him. So for 30 plus years, you were in sales and absolutely hated it. Why would you do that to your son? We don't always learn our lessons early in life, but when we do, it surely can make a difference. Yeah. So yeah. I'm sure for your husband, it's difficult because he probably has his peers, you know, talking about their kids and their families as well.
Now we're older, we're similar age, now we're older, it doesn't worry him as much. But as our eldest son, the one who learned so quickly, made his way through high school, he failed everything. And one morning, my husband had to do parent-teacher interviews with all of his sons, all his teachers, and you're hearing the same negativity. And then the next thing, then he had to go and went to the doctor, and his blood pressure was like 190 over 150.
Oh my God.
And that was, when you're seeing this bright kid fail, it was really, really, really difficult. And then he eventually did go on to college. We were in Texas at this time, and he failed three subjects, most likely 3 out of the 4. My husband didn't tell me.
Oh, okay.
And after that, my son took a year off. He worked and grew up and ended up doing an engineering degree and ended up with a GPA of 4. There's failures all along. It's not simple. It's not a journey that rises, and we didn't talk to him for years. And now I talk to him every week. And he said to my husband not so long ago, he said, Mum, I talk to you. I don't talk to Dad. That's not good. I've got to talk to Dad as well. So now father and son have a slot in my husband's timetable to talk each week.
I love that. That is wonderful. And, we have to understand that a journey in life for no one is simple. Okay. You can believe whatever you want on Facebook. Okay. You can watch a Hallmark movie and believe that it's always happily ever after. But the reality of it is we're all going to climb mountains. We're going to slide down hills. Sometimes we're going to slip on the ice. And you know what? If we learn from those mistakes, we get better by it. So I know this Thanksgiving, we are finally going to be with family after almost 11 years of, just the 3 of us. And I'm prepared because my brother is, he writes a blog every week about the political atmosphere of the world. Okay. He lets his whole heart and soul out. So he's going to have, everybody around the table. And I know the discussion's going to come up. And I'm prepared for it. I'm not going to let it upset me. I'm not going to let it, ruin Thanksgiving. We're going to be with people that we may not necessarily have chosen to get along with. But you know what? It's Thanksgiving, and enjoy it for what it's worth. Laugh a lot, and just know that, it's just part of the journey.
As I've got older, I didn't think I'd ever get this old. As I've got older, I realized, all we really do in life is make memories.
Right.
So what sort of memories do you want? Do we want, well, we exploded at that Thanksgiving. Or do we want, wow, you know, that was so nice to be with them. What are we making? What memories are we making? That's how I see things now. So I try and make positive memories because all of the bad ones are coming back to haunt me.
Well, and I try to do that on a daily basis now.
Yes.
I on the weekend I do IT work, and it can be very frustrating. But I go in and I go, I'm going to do the best I can. I'm going to do it with a smile on my face. If somebody irritates me, I'll walk out to my car and I'll sit there for a few minutes and fume and then go back in. I didn't do that as a younger person. Doing it now, it
Yes.
just makes life so much easier. It's
Easy.
like, okay, they didn't understand what I was talking about. I had to go figure it out, go back in. If they still don't understand, I'll have to figure that out too.
Yeah.
But I used to hold a grudge so much in my younger days. Always was worried about trying to be perfect and then disappointing people, disappointed myself. So I think you and I have been on a somewhat similar journey, even though we just met today. And that's what I want people to understand. We're not that different from each other.
Mm.
But I noticed something hanging over your shoulder. I want you to tell me what it is. Reversed, a memoir.
That is my book. And that is my book, Reversed, a Memoir. About the story of my son, and the ups and the downs and the positives and the negatives. And yes, that's my story, our story. I've got to tell you something funny. And, as you say, the ups and the downs, even though my son got a PhD, he had problems. There's been ups and downs in all sorts of ways. One of the things I wrote was a poem about hieroglyphics. I've just been born too late, by a few thousand years or so, when reading and writing is not so important, and hieroglyphics were all the go. I have this little problem, for reading's hard for me. Hieroglyphics is what I like and should be used by people like me. And that sent Nicholas and I on a journey to the British Museum and hieroglyphics, and he wrote a story in hieroglyphics, blah, 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 blah. Lots of funny things. Nick, I can't tell you where Nick works now, but he is going to Egypt next month. And I'm going to join him. And we get to explore hieroglyphics and Alexandria. It's unbelievable, the journey. The highs of our journey have just been way beyond expectations. So, and that's where we go back to the maid. I felt for the little girl in the maid, because language development is critical. And my son and his wife watched it and said, Nicholas said, I couldn't believe how good that kid was. And she just tagged along. Maybe she knew. But, language development in children requires us to talk to them.
Absolutely.
And to do things with them and, to share all of these things. So language development, talking to kids, listening to books, sharing ideas is a critical component of learning. So, so that's my story reversed. It tells you the fun. It tells you a little bit about hieroglyphics. And next month, I'm going to blog about it, about our journey together. And Nicholas is working in Egypt. Well, he is. He's working in Cairo. He's got
How
10
wonderful.
months. Yeah.
That is exciting. And again, what I hope we can do after your trip and all the learning, let's have you back on and let's talk about, what it was like for mom and son, to connect over something that has helped him all these years. I think that'd be wonderful.
I'd love it. I'd love it. Yes, because that's my plan, is to write about it and take photos. And yes.
Well, I look forward to that. In the meantime, tell your 3 sons from me that they have one terrific mother. And, God bless them. I mean, they're all on a path. They're all taking a journey. And, they're giving you a little bit of freedom right now. So we appreciate that.
Thank you, Karen. It's been so much fun to be here. Reach out to us if you have kids that struggle. Talk to us, share your journey, share your ups and your downs and your worries, because keeping it to yourself is really hard.
Absolutely. And to everybody listening, it's November right now. Holidays are coming about. Plan for your happiness. And you can take that any way you want. Have a great day. Bye-bye now.
Thank you.
Thank you.